You know, everybody has their pinnacle. Like if you look at your own personal history of gaming expertise, everybody has that moment where it's like, this is where I peaked and was like, I could have been a pro. And for me, it was Half-Life 1 Deathmatch, which any competitive FPS player is like rolling their eyes right now. Like, really, dude? Like, you couldn't have said Quake 3 or Counter-Strike or something like, but I swear to God, I was godlike in Half-Life 1 Deathmatch. I could literally kill entire maps with the crowbar alone.
Just throwing snarks at everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
The word MOBA is a filthy word in the world of video games. It's like mustard, you're either in or you're out. And it was a word that was thrown around quite a lot when Overwatch first hit the gaming consciousness back in 2014. And with so many MOBA-like shooters hitting the news at the same time, it was no wonder. But the truth is, Overwatch isn't a MOBA. In fact, when you get right down and play it, it's a game that almost feels like a best-of collection of some of the shooters many of us grew up playing. In fact, when talking to the team about how the game was crafted, it's amazing just how many games were used as inspiration. But personally, my first question when I first heard about Overwatch was, what the hell are Blizzard doing making an online shooter? What does a studio known for making games about wizards and goblins and flying lion birds know about online shooters? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot.
There was a mod for Quake 2 called Action Quake. And some of the guys who worked on Action Quake went on to work on Counter-Strike. There was a split. It was Action Half-Life and Counter-Strike were what was going to become of the Action Quake community. And Action Quake was one of the greatest mods of all time. So I was following those guys from the get-go, and I was around in Counter-Strike back in the day when you could cycle weapons back to your spawn. So if your team was winning, you would kill most of the enemy team, and let's say there was one terrorist left. You didn't kill him. You took all the weapons on the map and you just cycled them all the way back to your spawn. Then you ran, you killed the guy, and now all the good weapons were waiting at your spawn. So I was around in pretty early days of those things. Half-Life 1 shipped with the map editor on the disc, and ironically the name of the map editor was Worldcraft, just to add confusion to it all. But it was an amazing program, and there was a really thriving modding community and mapping community going on. And that's where I was really learning. I had previously made maps for games like Duke Nukem, which had also shipped with the map editor on the disc. But it was really in Half-Life that I really got a feel for what it takes to make a map and have it run well and have other people play test it, and it was super exciting. I made a couple maps for that.
Before Jeff Goodman, who's our designer working on Overwatch, he and I were actually in a Team Fortress clan. We didn't even know each other. Like, I was working at Blizzard and he wasn't sure where he was, and then he got a tech support job at Blizzard. And so he came up through the ranks, and then we were both here, and sort of this weird, like, whoa, that's just a bit of like weird, like, synergistic stuff. It's like, how did all this happen? But yeah, but now we're making this like really awesome shooter, and we can't be happier.
What was it like jumping into the first-person space?
I don't know, at some level, I want to say, terrifying, no safety net. Like, what could you guys possibly be thinking when there's so many shops in the industry that do this, just that are world-class experts at this content? But I believe, Jeff Kaplan had an instinct of the product he wanted to make and how it would feel.
I mean, I think a lot of us were FPS fans for our whole lives, and so there's always been this kind of dream to work on an FPS. The FPS, unlike a lot of other genres, the FPS is very explored. There's such a diversity in what people do with FPSs, and there's also a mastery in the genre. There are a lot of, there's some genres that you look at and you see as fertile ground where there are cool ideas, but nobody's ever done the great game in the genre. Whereas with FPS, there are many great games. There are many all-time, you want to put them on the wall, Hall of Fame type of games. I have behind my desk over there, I actually have the boxes for Doom 1 and Doom 2, like just sitting there in honor of like sort of the greatness. So it's a daunting genre to step into. The fans know exactly what they want out of the genre and are very particular. So you're kind of stepping into something that is hallowed ground, and you have to be very careful to respect what has been done there for 20 years before you.
Presumably, though, you guys thought that there was something that people hadn't nailed yet, that there was something that you guys could do that nobody had done before.
Absolutely. I think it was a mix of things. I think FPSs in the past, I want to say decade, have been trending towards realism and modern military. Or if they stepped outside of realism, it was towards gritty near future and sort of barely near future. Like here's what an AK-47 would look like 5 years from now. So we felt like there was a space to explore that went beyond that. The other thing that we didn't see a lot of happening was new and unique movement. So having come from sort of the Quake modding community, where I remember when segueing from Quake 1 to Quake 2, there was like almost this race in the modding community who could make the grapple hook the fastest. But it was all about rocket jumping and grapple hooks, and there was even grenade jumping, and it was, how could you move around the map quickly and in these really like fluent, elegant ways. And one of the things that we wanted to sort of bring back to the FPS was abilities and movement and fluidity in how you moved, and skill, like Widowmaker, who's our sniper, for example. A lot of people use her grapple not just to get up to a high vantage point, but to actually launch themselves and snipe while in air. So we wanted to get into some of that really high skill, epic, sort of fluid, really fun to watch type of gameplay. Added to that was team gameplay. So I think the masters of team gameplay in the FPS genre was the Team Fortress series. And it started with Team Fortress the mod for Quake 1, which was amazing, one of my favorites ever. Then I don't hear a lot of people talk about it, but Team Fortress Classic, which was the update to Half-Life 1. And again, as a Half-Life 1 guy, I just lost myself in that for so long. And then Team Fortress 2, in a lot of ways, especially when it launched back in 2007, was as perfect of a design of a team-based shooter as you could ever achieve. I mean, visually, from the gameplay mechanics, from the balance, from the maps and the modes, it was just a brilliant, brilliant game. And what had happened over the years since Team Fortress 2's release is we had this big boom of MOBA games. And I think the thing that really spoke to people in MOBAs more than anything was how coordinated teams could really be successful. And the Team Fortress competitive community knew that this existed, but that community was really small. Like the Team Fortress community was huge in terms of who was playing it, but a lot of us were playing it in pubs where we'd get on these servers that would be modified, like I'm playing 12v12 instant respawn, and it was just kind of this chaos meat grinder where I think the TF2 competitive people realized, like, no, if you really coordinate and play this in a tight competitive way, it's all about the team play that you saw exploding in MOBAs. And those games were built from the get-go to embrace, in their case, 5v5 gameplay. So I think we saw a refinement that could take place that said, well, what if you had these cool abilities, epic, abilities happening, great movement, and then really embrace the team play and objective-based gameplay, but really focus people on winning or losing as a group. So I think all those elements combined are what led to Overwatch becoming Overwatch.
You think of all the ideas from all the first-person shooters during that amount of time. There's a lot of like great ideas to explore and say like, hey, that worked back then. Like, what can we do with it now and make even better? We knew. I mean, the rocket launcher is probably the When you think first-person shooter, I mean, there's like assault rifles and rocket launchers. Like between those two, we knew we were going to have someone with a rocket launcher. And very early on, it was sort of interesting because we were first doing our one of our first milestones. Initially, we really only planned for like 3 heroes. It was like Reaper, Tracer, and like Widowmaker. And Jeff Goodman was like, I think I can get a rocket launcher character in like super fast. And he just did it. And it was sort of like, of course we're gonna put a rocket launcher. It was like, yes, we're doing that. And it's like, if we get that in like super fast, do it. Yeah, so we sort of just snuck, you know, Farah into that like milestone. Even when she wasn't called Farah, I think, you know, her code name was Rocket Queen. Like if you go into like, well, like a file name that's not Farah dot, you know, whatever, it's like Rocket Queen. We knew we were eventually gonna do someone with a grenade launcher. Like, Junkrat came like later on during on, but like we'd always talked about it. It was like that was, and because that was one of the things when we were developing Torbjorn was, oh, the turrets are like super strong. It's like, yeah, but we're gonna do the grenade launcher character, and that's gonna change things because he can lob the grenades and like, you know, hit the turrets where the turrets can't fire back. And then we just like, okay, then we finally did it, but we did it with like our spin with the traps and the remote control detonation.
There's a lot to talk about when it comes to hero design, especially how many of them reference classic shooters of old and some not so old. But we'll dive into that properly in the 3rd video in this series. Right now I wanted to quiz Jeff about the many ways in which Overwatch is entirely similar to many online shooters. I wanted to ask him about its game modes, its map design, and how exactly you breathe new life onto such well-trodden ground.
The game modes themselves are sort of familiar. Most of them are. We've seen them in other games. Is that like almost intentional? Because if you start mixing up game modes and all those different heroes, it sort of might overcomplicate it for players.
Absolutely, and in fact, you know, you guys are here visiting us in our space, and you walk around, you'll see we'll have things up on the wall, and on one of the walls out there is sort of our level design, high-level guiding goals, and one of the first ones is it's all about the heroes, which is a funny thing to say about the level design, like the maps and the level design is, it's all about the heroes. Every game mode that we ever do, we want to make sure that we don't shift the focus of the players. There's a lot going on when you're playing Overwatch. It's a very fast-paced game. Things are coming at you very quickly, and you need an immediate read on what's going on in the battlefield. Also, there are roles and sort of strengths and weaknesses to all the characters. If we try to over-engineer a game mode too much, you're going to suddenly lose focus on what the core of the game is. And the core of the game should be, you know, hey, Steven over there is playing Farah right now. Maybe I should switch to 76 or McCree because I think I'm really good at countering Farah with 76 or McCree. Some of the game modes that we explore get very complicated and gimmicky, and you get in these modes of like, you know, okay, there's 2 foozles, and then there's widgets, and then you need to get the widgets to the foozles, and if foozle A has more widgets than foozle B, and basically, and suddenly you're thinking of the interface you need to do that, and then you're lost in it all is, well, what happened to Tracer, and what happened to Winston, and what happened to Widowmaker, or they don't matter anymore. So it's a very deliberate choice for us to pick game modes that in a lot of ways fade into the background. The game is not about, you know, wacky, crazy game modes. The game is at its essence about these amazing heroes and the things that you're able to accomplish with them.
There were some things that I really worried about at the start of the process, going from designing space in World of Warcraft or any open world game, because I ended up transitioning over to the exterior level design team there, and the spaces there are huge. You're building whole zones, and you're really worried about vistas and kind of how it feels just on like an immersion level a lot of the time. And so I was really worried about scale when we first started, because it'd be so easy to just kind of keep running with what we had on WoW. And so we did a lot of research early on into how big a map ought to be and how big even just one engagement area ought to be. And we did a lot of work looking at other games. We loaded up a lot of Team Fortress 2 and Call of Duty, even in their editors, and we kind of started measuring things out to just see what it was that those games did. And it was actually really interesting to me that in my head I was expecting those games spaces to be a lot different than they were, but they're actually pretty similar, a lot of the engagement distances in those. We did a lot of work on scale and how far away we wanted people shooting each other, and we were looking a lot at FOV and character speed because they all kind of go hand in hand. And once we started feeling that that worked well, everything became about the heroes in the game.
Team Deathmatch is a really interesting one that comes up. First of all, Team Deathmatch in a lot of ways becomes an oxymoron to me, and that's not a fair statement, but Team Deathmatch just means I don't get to kill half the people, but I'm not really coordinating or interacting with the other members of my team. It's in all the games that I played with Team Deathmatch, you have these moments where you run around a corner and you kind of look at the other guy, you're like, okay, and then you run, like, carry on, like, please don't take my kill. Like, that's sort of all, or you're annoyed that the other guy died. Also in a hero-based game like Overwatch, if you look at a hero like Mercy, like, what does she become if we sort of just reduce the game down to the Team Deathmatch? She's, I think in a lot of ways you break a character like that, or you break a character like Symmetra, who in a team-based objective game, they're some of the most powerful characters we have, but in a pure deathmatch, they suddenly become really questionable choices. We do not design our characters to be this perfectly balanced 1v1 rock, paper, scissors, like every hero can beat every other hero in a 1v1 situation. They're absolutely not balanced and tuned that way. So it would sort of be a disservice to a lot of our heroes to sort of make the focus of the game more of a team deathmatch.
To that point as well, you've also done, you know, something that almost like never occurred to a lot of team-based games, is like stripping out that sort of kill-death ratio hunt that everyone has in not having traditional score screens. Can you sort of speak to the ethos behind that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I'm really happy to talk about, because there's been a misconception in our community that, you know, Blizzard doesn't have a traditional scoreboard because they're catering to the casuals and they're a bunch of Care Bears and it's all about toxicity. And I find those conversations really interesting, and I think that there's, you know, some valid arguments people have made in terms of toxicity, but that hasn't been the reason at all. And in fact, if you go back and look at older versions of the game, we used to have a scoring system, and we iterated endlessly on these scoreboards and scoring systems and what's the perfect scoreboard. The scoreboard that a lot of players want is what I call the spreadsheet. It's just rows and columns of everything, and then like let us figure it out. But that feels like kind of a give up moment to us, because we want players to be able to look at the scoreboard and go, I know who's performing really well and I know who's not. And if we just make it about kills and deaths, it doesn't tell the complete story of who's doing well and who's doing not. Like, for example, you know, how does Mercy factor in to a kill-death ratio type of scoring system? Conversely, you know, we have tried other scoring systems where people were said, well, make it all about the objective. So like who's on the payload and who's capturing points and who's not capturing points, or who's killing people on the payload and not killing people on the payload. But we have characters like Tracer and Genji in the game who are really unique in how Overwatch is played, and sometimes the absolute right thing for Tracer to be doing is to be off on her own, completely away from the objective or completely away from the team, harassing other players who are running back from the spawn. And she might not even be killing those players. Sometimes she's killing them, sometimes she's not. She's a distracting, ambushing skirmisher, and that doesn't really fit in necessarily with objective time. Sometimes it's about kills with Tracer, but sometimes it's not. You can be the absolute MVP of the match when you're doing some of those things, and there's no way to really score it accurately. So we basically stopped displaying any form of scores, kills, deaths, because it really wasn't telling the story of who was doing their job properly to win or lose as a team. And really what it's all about is, did you win or lose as a team? And none of that other stuff really matters at the end of the day.
And we always want your team of 6 to be working together to accomplish an objective together. And whether that's a stated objective in the game, such as escort this payload or capture this control point, or it's some of our softer objectives, which is just break through this choke point. We quickly started developing a series of things that we'd use in the map to bring a whole team together, whether it was on offense or defense, to kind of break through and accomplish what they needed to.
From listening to the designers talk about Overwatch, one thing comes across. This is a group of individuals who are incredibly well versed in game design. This, coupled with a deep respect for the FPS lineage and a passion for classic shooters, means they are well equipped to try and deliver something new in what has become a rather stale genre of late. As you've seen from today's video, they very much have their sights set on team play as the way to achieve this. But we've only told half of that story. Tomorrow, in our third and final video, we explore the heroes of Overwatch, how they connect this game with classic shooters of old, and how a team hopes to balance a game with 21 different characters on offer. See you then.
Actually, last question.
Yeah.
Who's the hero that has caused you the most hassle as a map designer?
Oh my gosh, it's Farah and Widowmaker. They can just get anywhere in a map, and it's always one of the two of them you see on the forums, just I got over here, and so we spend a lot of time fixing bugs associated with either of those.
Guess who my 2 favorite characters are?
Farah and Widowmaker? Yeah, thanks a lot.